¿Qué pasa? Que the hell pasa, amigos? Welcome to the Friday show, the live show. I am, of course, your host, Adam Quiney. Of course. Who else could it be? I'm doing a live tea pour. I didn't even get that on camera. Let's get that on camera. There we go. Started off right with a little bit of Earl Grey. We're heading into the December break. That's my break, not necessarily your break. But I hope you have some holidays planned. I can't remember if I shared this last week on our live show, but one of the things that's interesting about the nature of the work I do is that it's it's a lot of energetic work. And I know often when someone tells me they're doing a lot of energetic work, my instinct, not the truth that I like sit in, but my instinct is sounds like they're doing sweet fuck all. That's my instinct when someone tells me, oh, I'm doing a lot of energetic work. So I'm going to elaborate on that to preemptively get out in front of someone deciding that I'm doing sweet fuck all. What I mean by a lot of my work is energetic is that if you looked at what I'm doing through the day, I am not physically pushing large pieces of machinery around a field or like, doing hard physical labor. And I'm not doing hard mental labor. Like when I was a lawyer, I had these complicated problems. Or when I was a software developer or a project manager, I was looking at these complex like web of code and trying to figure out how do I resolve that? That's hard mental labor. I'm not I do some of that, but like largely if you were to look at my work, you would see like, yeah, he's not solving hard problems and he's not, doing hard physical labor. The labor I'm doing is energetic. And the way that that energetic work is done is that all of us have what we could call a survival mechanism. And our survival mechanism's job, it's a set of strategies that are designed to keep us in the center of our comfort zone. And our comfort zone's like all of what you already have in your life. It's all of what you already are familiar with. It's not actually necessarily comfortable, it's what you are familiar with. And so these strategies, for example, if I'm afraid of seeming dumb, if that's scary and confronting for me, then my strategies will work to avoid me having to end up in situations where I might be perceived as dumb. So one example might be that when someone says, what are we going to do? And I don't have a clear answer that I know is going to result in being right, I'll get like really busy with a bunch of research so I can figure out that answer so that then I can take the action because then I know that I won't, end up looking stupid for where I led us. Or another strategy I might do is seek out some experts that'll tell me what to do and then I'll follow their advice and lead us courageously based on that expert's advice. So both of those are really effective strategies for not seeming dumb. They're our survival mechanism. Hey, Raf. Hello, everyone. Got 8 viewers. Bam! An all-time high for the show. Please, everyone, say hello. Put your name in there. I'm going to keep talking about these survival mechanisms and the energetic heavy lifting of coaching and leadership work. So, hey, Maria. Nice to see you. So, those strategies, their job in part is to convince everyone around us that we are a certain way. Hey Drew, those strategies of ours work really hard to do things like convince everyone else that it's absolutely essential that I figure out the right answer before I take action. And that I really don't have any idea, hey Tommy, there's no way I could move forward without getting that answer. So the way that shows up, hey, Maria, you just disappeared from our comments. That's weird. You deleted your own comment, but I saw it. I saw it show up there. So the way that works in a coaching conversation is someone's belief that they might occur as stupid and therefore need to sit here and not knowing until they do know. That's a good strategy that will keep them from doing things they perceive as stupid, but ultimately that's going to lead to a limited set of options available to them. And if someone is playing a game in their life where they want to create results that are not currently available to them, they're going to have to move off of the comfort provided by that, like, I only do stuff once I know what I'm confident that it's the right thing to do. And so my job is to support them to get clear on what they want so that they've got a reason to actually take any of this stuff on, and then to do what's called stand with them as they push out of their comfort zone into the world of the unknown and take on the scary stuff. And what happens at that nexus is that they're going to get to a point where they're going to sort of land in, well, I don't know what to do. Adam, what do you think I should do? They're going to bring into the coaching or the leadership conversation the same way of being that they bring everywhere else in the world. What should we do? I don't know. Let me find the answer from someone else. There's a billion different ways this can look. We're just working with like stupidity, brilliance, trying to find an answer, that particular set. So what'll happen is that we get into these conversations where they work really hard unconsciously to convince both of us, me and them, that they don't have an answer, and what's more, they just simply can't figure one out. And I don't know if you've ever spent time around someone like this, but it gets really frustrating. It gets to the point where we're like, are you fucking kidding me? You can't think of a single thing? Like kick a rock at a door. That's a thing to do. But because of how entrenched these patterns of being are, people get really like locked in. They literally can't see any possibility, anything else to do. And so my job, and the job arguably of any coach who's committed to being transformational, my job in these moments is to stand outside of this story about themselves, to stand for this possibility that actually this person does have some idea. They could come up with something. They could brainstorm any idea. They could make something up. They could choose something. They are not actually stuck in I don't know, the way they are unconsciously working to convince both of us that they really don't know, and there's really no way that they could possibly come up with anything else. And when confronted, when in that sort of energetic interaction with someone where they are working so hard to convince you that they are totally helpless and there's no way I could figure anything else out to do, if you've ever been in this situation, you know how fucking compelling it is. You want to just say, fucking give me that and do it for them, you stupid child. You moron. How could you not know? Like, come on, this is so obvious. Just do it this way. And what that does is it gives them the thing their survival mechanism is designed to get. So what they've done in that moment where you just lose it, where you're like, I'm tired of this. This is awful. I can't sit around and watch this person bumble around anymore. You buy into their strategy because they have, in that moment, gotten you to step in and give them an answer. Give me that thing. We'll just do it. And then they go one more time around the Ferris wheel. They get back into their cycle, which is what had them coming to you in the first place. So this work requires some tremendous heavy lifting in that it requires us to feel all of that. We have to stay open-hearted. One easy way to avoid that is just to be shut off, to be kind of like a sociopath, to be disconnected from them entirely and just sit there and nod our head, but not let any of it impact us. But people can feel that. That's not a very, we just don't feel met by people in that situation. So the job's to stay open-hearted, to feel this person, to feel everything that's going on for them, and then to feel our own internal desire to like step in, to feel that like incredible urge to just give me that, let me do it. Fuck, this is excruciating. And then whilst feeling that, to stand in place and say, nope, I'm going to really stand in the belief, the possibility that you actually can solve this on your own and that you actually don't know anyone else. It might require some actions that are unfamiliar to you. It might require doing something that's confronting, such as choosing a direction and not knowing if it's going to be the right direction. But I'm going to stand over here and I'm not going to move off of this stand I have for you. That is draining. It's draining because we're working really hard to, draining is not quite the right term. A better term would be like just demanding. It's energetically demanding because we're working to go against our own kind of natural patterns and strategies. You end up in leadership and coaching conversations with people that are kind of the imago match for you. They're the yin to your yang. So if you're the sort of leader who got to where you are by like snatching stuff out of people's hands and doing it for them and then being like, there you go, you're naturally going to draw to you people that will look to have someone snatch stuff out of their hands, give it to them, and then they can move forward. And then there's like a whole bunch of other stuff that goes along with that. Like Those people will probably also feel disempowered. They'll have a continual, persistent complaint that, oh, my boss never trusts me. And then they'll get into that sort of situation and they'll flail around and they'll wait for you to take it out of their hands, thereby proving that you don't trust them and also proving that they require someone to do that in the first place. So you're going to get locked into this perfect key into lock kind of fit. And that to not fall into that whirlpool requires a tremendous amount of energy, requires a lot of what we call generating yourself, staying open, opening our heart in the face of our desire to close and be like, fuck you, you fool, give me that. And standing off and loving the person, working our way back to like loving the person and not buying into the story that they are unconsciously working to convince us is true. Not buying into the story that they're helpless or that they need us to snatch it out of their hands or that they're awful or despicable or whatever it happens to be. That demands a great deal. And so I've been coming up to this break and I can feel that I'm ready for a break. And the more as I have grown my own capacity and like attracted people working with me that are playing bigger games, those people have more and more formidable survival mechanisms. And so it requires more and more of my own energy and generating to be with them. And therefore, it becomes more and more important that I take these sort of breaks. So sometimes people are like, it must be nice taking a month off, which it kind of is, but it's also essential at this point. It's no longer like an option. If I don't do that, I'll just burn out. And so I think there's something there for all of us. As we do more and more, the societal trend is to take less and less breaks. You've moved up in management, so now here's your second phone, and you're going to be probably called to answer calls in the evenings, and you need to be available at any time. Great. But we also need to stand for we need more vacation time if you're going to ask more capacity from us. We're not there yet. We're working to create that. It's not quite in the same place, but as entrepreneurs, as leaders, it's really important that we stand for that. Yeah, Drew, I'm with you, Drew. Drew says, what you're saying, Adam, is reminding me of what good parents do as well. It's so tempting to give answers. Yeah, so tempting to give answers as parents, so tempting to give answers as leaders. Because when we give an answer, we are right, and we have a pedestal of authority, and we are someone providing value, rather than standing for and supporting someone else to discover their own value. That's the challenge of leadership, or one of the big challenges, is that as a leader, we want to provide value, and actually our word is to support people to discover their own value. And so if you aren't really grounded and supported ongoingly to be able to see and trust in the value you are simply by virtue of who you be, it becomes super compelling to well, I'm going to give value, I'll provide value. And then what you're actually doing is getting in the way of this person discovering their own value. Super funny, isn't it? I find that funny. Funny like a cosmic joke funny. And then Drew's also quoting, not buying into the story of them being helpless. I've worked with lots of different survival mechanisms, and one of the most challenging one for me is working with someone who their story about themselves is that they're despicable or that they're like a piece of garbage. Because sure enough, they're going to work. We all do this. We train the world around us to relate to our crappy story about ourselves. It's not fun. It's not what we really consciously would choose for ourselves, but there's a safety in it. There's a safety in that part of identity. And so when that's the survival mechanism, it's tough because your client's really working to prove to you that they're garbage and then get you to treat them the same way they're treating themselves internally. That's hard. Anyhow, that's why I've got a break coming up. And yet, I kind of like doing these lives. It's kind of fun hanging out with you guys. It's kind of fun drinking tea. I got some stuff I want to talk about, so we're going to talk about them. Let's start right out of the gate with Raf's question, because Raf brought it's the second time we've had a Sam Harris quote. Y'all are reading Sam Harris and bringing him into these live shows. So if you are in ongoing relationship with Sam Harris, tell him he and I should have a conversation. Let's set that up. Let's make that happen. So Raf says, I'd love to hear you talk about identity and how it can aid or potentially stifle our aims. This is inspired by the quote from Sam Harris. You are not who you think you are, but you are condemned to be who you think you are. So the the way it goes with identity as a as like a, maybe we call it like a baseline, or the default way it goes is that we have a story. All of us have a story about like what we are and are not and how we are. And in truth, a lot of coaching tools, rather than open up more possibility for who we could become, a lot of these leadership coaching tools like MBTI, Myers-Briggs typing, they actually reinforce, entrench, and narrow that identity. And what an identity does is it says, this is my lane. This is what I'm good at. This is what I'm capable of. This is what I can do. This is the stuff I don't do. And then as we move forward in life, we become more and more committed and entrenched in that story about ourselves. And then that actually reinforces the truth of that story about ourselves. So this is what Sam is talking about in his quote. You're not who you think you are, but you're condemned to be who you think you are. So if I have a story that I'm clumsy, for example, I like clumsy because it's a weird one. You know, we people just have this belief like I'm just a clumsy, awkward person. Well, let's use it in the context of one wheeling. So Bay and I really have gotten into one wheeling. You know, big tire, little board. You kind of, it's like surfing or snowboarding on pavement. It's an amazing sport. It also can be dangerous. I've got road rash on my elbow. It's slowly healing. Messed up one of my tattoos from falling off my one wheel. That was not inherent to the one wheel. It was me getting a little cocky and overly confident and then bailing and not wearing protective gear and blah, 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 blah. So don't do that. But as we've taken on learning one wheeling, Bay has a story about herself. And the story about herself is she's just not good at this kind of stuff. And what happens with that story that she is not good at that kind of stuff is that she is prone to getting scared and panicky. So as she's been learning, she's come a long way, but in the early days, she would be on this one wheel and she'd be going slow and she'd be moving towards a curb. And as she got to the curb, she'd start to panic. I'm going to hit the curb. She's going like at this rate. She's crawling along. It's not going to be a crisis if she hit the curb, but that doesn't matter. Her fear doesn't care. Her fear is like, you hit that curb, it's like the Titanic hitting an iceberg. We're going to all go down. This whole neighborhood will probably fall into a sinkhole if you hit that curb, girl. So she's going towards it. And the thing for her to do is to lean, and then she'll turn away from the curb. But what happens internally is this identity starts to scream with a loud voice. The identity says, hey, you're not good at this. You don't know how to handle this. Don't hit the curb. It's going to be bad if you hit the curb. You can't seem to do anything. And so what happens is she tenses and tightens up. And then what happens is, because that's the story, because she's panicky and tense, she can't relax and just lean forward, which is a bit counterintuitive at first. It's kind of like walking, right? Walking is a state of falling, and then we put the next foot forward. You have to have, most of us take this for granted, but to walk, you have to be willing to get off balance. You have to lean forward such that your foot has to be put in front of you to catch you. Walking is kind of a perpetual state of catching yourself falling. So she's going to this curb, she starts to panic, she gets tense, she gets rigid, she gets scared, and she jumps off the board. And what happens is a couple things. One, she saves the day. She got off the board, so that's good. But two, it proves that she's not good at this kind of stuff. Because if she was, she'd just be able to turn. She can see she's moving slowly. It's not a big deal. I'm just not good at this. And from that, she doesn't want to continue. I'm just not good at this. I can't keep doing this. I need to stop. This sucks. I hate it. I'm mad at myself. I should be better, but I'm just not that way. I should caveat at this point in the story, this is all my version of what's happening. Bay might tell this story differently. She might have a different experience. So I want to be cautious about sort of imposing the way it occurs to me as Bay's experience. I don't know what her experience is, but this is what I see. The other thing that happens is, because of all of what happened, she jumps off the board and she never gets a chance to actually like fix it, to actually turn out of the death glide into the curb. And so she never gets to discover for herself, oh, I actually can resolve this. And so by jumping off in reaction to her story that she's not good at this and she's going to hit the thing and she's going to fall, it actually proves that she's not good at this. She never gets to discover actually she does have the capacity. She actually can be good at this. So that's a really simple example of where the identity that she's clumsy and just not good at this stuff kind of reinforces and then proves the truth of that. It becomes a vicious cycle. And so then every time she's out, the best that could happen is she could get really good at doing this sport where every time she enters into a situation, she just jumps off of it. And then so she could ride a one wheel slowly and then continually jump off and that way never get into trouble. The problem with that is that that's not really the fun in this. The fun in this sport is not, it'd be sort of like, hey, you can snowboard, but you're never going to get past the point where like you go for 3 seconds and you fall over. That's going to stop you from maybe hurting yourself or, you'll never go too fast, but that's not really what we're doing it for. We're doing it for the thrill. We're doing it because it's fun. We want to go a little quicker. We want to kind of glide and have this smooth, buttery feel down the hills and the pavement and with the sun and all of that sort of stuff. So that identity has been something Bay's really been breaking up through this sport, through us working together. And it's interesting watching this as it goes because I can feel in myself this desire to get angry, annoyed. Stop doing that. But that's actually just going to make her tense even more and then keep that cycle going. So both of us have had to practice with this. My practice is to like really get like, no, she's going to do fine. And she actually can move through this and to continue to stand in that belief and to love her from that place as that shift. And for her to really practice like, I can actually do this and breathe into it. So that's kind of an example of how identity reinforces. Here's a whole bunch of kind of identities that we create around ourselves. I'm good at math. I'm just not good at poetry. I just don't like this kind of music. I'm just not that kind of person. Hey, Michelle, I saw you're in London. That's exciting. Michelle Aubrey checking in from London. I love the city you're in. Make sure you check out Carnaby Street. There's some really cool little alleys through Carnaby Street. I'm not good at parallel parking. I'm a Gemini, and therefore I'm X, Y, and Z. My human design type is this, and therefore blah, blah, blah. My leadership style just isn't blah, 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 blah. I'm just not the kind of person that. All of these are stories about ourselves that we then get locked into. This is problematic in leadership. And the reason it's problematic in leadership is for a leader to have the most impact. And that's the point. That's like the gauge for leadership. What is my capacity to cause the change that I want to cause in the world? That creates impact. So a leader is more impactful when they're like, I want to make this happen, and they're able to do it efficiently. Whereas a leader that says, I want to make this happen, but I can't, so I'll make this smaller, more watered down version of it happen, that's not as impactful. That's not as powerful a leader. So in order for a leader to be as impactful as possible, they need to be able to do and be whatever is required. The trouble is our identity stands in the way of that. So I'm going to give one more example here, and then we'll probably start to wind this down. Or then I'll come back to the Sam Harris quote to wind us down. Some people will be raised in houses where their parents are very passionate, and that passion looked a whole bunch of ways. Wild excitement, and then wild excruciating disappointment. Anger, fire, and then highs and lows. And these people concluded, I'm not going to be like that. I don't want to be like my parents, because they saw the disempowering nature of that. They saw the consequences of it, and they concluded, not for me. And so these people start this process to not be like their parents. And so what they do with their passion is they dim it. They take this sine wave of human expression and they pull the sides taut. And so they get this very low kind of steady kind of curve. And then they get into life 30 years later after having practiced this for time and time and time again. And they end up at this point where they're like a very flat leader, which is really good when cool heads are what are called for. But there may be times when what their team actually needs to see modeled is passion. They need to see the leader care about what's going on. They need to feel heat from the leader. They need the leader to say, God fucking damn it, this is unacceptable. Or, holy fuck, guys, we need to get stoked about this. And that leader will say, it's just not the way I am. Well, that's in the way of your leadership. Doesn't mean that you have to shout and be abusive to your team, but it means that your capacity, because of your identity about yourself, because of this way you learn to be in response to the way you were raised, that you've now come to conclude is who you are, that is in the way of you showing up any differently. Because from this is the way I am, there's no possibility of change. This is the way I am. Therefore, there's nothing I can do about it. The best we can do is manage around me. Here's another version that showed up in my life for a long time. Some people are smart and other people are dumb. And smart people will be able to get it and the dumb people won't. So what do you do in that situation if you're trying to make something happen? Your options are like, okay, try to filter out the dummies. Just let the smarties in. That's what I was kind of trying to do. And then you end up with this organization filled with like smart people, but because of the lens through which you filter and look at the world, it's only a matter of time before you bring that same lens to the people you've brought in. I let out the dummies, but now I'm filtering and sorting these people in this organization that same way. And this person's really smart and this person's just not smart enough. So now you've just taken that same lens and you've imposed it here. So it never really works. And it's eventually just a matter of time before you conclude this person's just not a candidate for leadership because they're kind of dumb. That really diminishes your ability to develop people. Once you've concluded that way, those people fall out. You can't do anything about them. And so the consequence of that as a leader is that we end up cutting out huge swaths of people from the capacity to develop them as a leader. Part of what makes you a great leader is your ability to develop leadership in everyone. And if you've just concluded 30% of the world is ineligible for leadership, well, now you're a leader who can only develop leadership in 2/3 of the entire population of the planet. That's just not a very effective leader. So that's kind of some of the ways that our identity gets us into trouble. And then what Sam's saying here is you are not who you think you are. So the way you've concluded you are, Adam is just this way, that's actually not true. You are the capacity for infinite expression. You have an essence, a set of like strong suits of particular qualities of being, but those qualities of being can be brought to anything. And even though those are your strong suits, you actually have access to every quality of being. That's the nature of what it is to be a human. So you're not who you think you are. Your story about yourself and the way you are and the things you're willing to do and the things you don't do and you're just not that way, that's not true. But to the extent you believe it's true, it holds you. The more you buy into the story that that's the way you are, the more that story will create itself as true and reinforce its truth and then continue in that path. So what I would disagree on with Sam here is the idea that you're condemned to be who you think you are. Who you think you are will reinforce and will like entrench itself, but you're never condemned to it. You're always able to create a shift. It's always possible to move beyond who you think you are, but it requires work and a willingness to get uncomfortable. Everything outside of our identity is a place where we will be pushing into discomfort. So it's not going to be fun per se. That's not even really fair, but it'll probably be a little bit confronting to move beyond your story about who you are, but it's possible. Drew, I'm just reading a comment Drew wrote on our previous topic. He was saying, I have to admit that on a coaching call where what I did was talk a lot and give a good speech, basically, because I was tired of the client's disempowerment. Yeah, I've been there too, Drew. And I really acknowledge you for sharing that. That's a lot of coaches burn out because they are working really hard to resolve their clients' problems because their clients have fooled the coach into believing that they need their problems solved by someone else. And then the client and the coach isn't usually doing their own work, so they can't see that they're actually buying into that thing and playing out that same dance with the client. And then they do it, and then they're like, this work's exhausting, I face burnout, it's too hard, I care too much. The problem is not that you care too much. The problem is that you're unaware that you've bought into that dance with the client and you're actively running it through with them. And that is exhausting. Trying to solve the world's problems, that's exhausting and impossible. The world has an infinite number of problems. We will never solve all of those problems. Okay, well, thanks, Sam Harris, for making another appearance here on the live show. Let's talk about some sneaky strategies for avoidance. Before I go there, I want to talk about like the essence of what transformation is, because that kind of speaks to this. So, what transformation is ultimately is expanding our capacity to be with more of life as it shows up. If we wanted to make that sound more fanciful, we would say transformation is expanding our ability to be with more of the abundance of life showing up. Life is abundance, and it'll bring us everything. It'll bring us war, it'll bring us peace. It'll bring us cruelty, and it'll bring us acts of great love. It'll bring us megalomania, and it'll bring us complete selflessness. It brings the entire spectrum. You've probably noticed this. Ongoing, no matter how much you wish that Putin would stop, or that Trump would start, or that whatever, life just keeps bringing us more and more and more of the infinite of abundance and possibility that's available in the world. And we can be with some parts of it, like most of us can be with like a degree of laughter, a degree of anger, a degree of sadness, a degree of like heartbreak, and a degree of like joy and love. And then there's like a capacity, we have a capacity where we're like, I can be with that much, but not that much. I can't be with someone screaming on a subway. I can't be with someone being overly joyful because it's childish. I can't be with someone being super angry because it's damaging and violent. That's our story about it, whether or not it's true. I can't be with me being super giddy because then people won't take me seriously, blah, 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 all of that sort of stuff. I can't be with my partner's disempowered story about themselves. I'm okay with like things going wrong, but I can't be with the way my partner is about it. So when we create transformation, when we create breakthroughs, what's actually happening is we're growing our ability to be with more of that. So if hold on, I think there's a sneeze coming on. Let me have a sip of tea and possibly sneeze it all out over my computer. Let's find out if that happens. It'll be fun. It went away. That would have been fun though. I would have enjoyed that. Not cleaning it up, but the sneeze itself would have been very satisfying, and the spit take. So as we grow our ability, our capacity to be with more, the beautiful thing that happens is you require life to shape itself less, meaning you don't need life to look any different than it already does. And that's incredibly freeing. That is the essence of freedom. I no longer need to lock my doors and keep out all the morons. I can be with people showing up any way at all. Smart, dumb, whatever. And the heart of that is because now I can be with me showing up any way at all. I can be with myself being a bozo. What a gift. I can see a gift in that. That was totally human of me, and that was kind of like a dumb thing I did. I should have known that if I tried to balance 3 cups of coffee and open a door and pet my dog, I was going to get coffee on myself. What a bozo. So that's what we're aiming for. And as people create that kind of shift, the results follow along. Once people can be with, say, more disappointment, for example, then they don't get so hurt when their staff does something disappointing. And when someone doesn't get so hurt when their staff does something disappointing, they won't be as reactive. And when they won't be as reactive, they can sit with that staff member and learn more about what happened and support them and train them and, do whatever. All of that becomes possible only on the other side of someone really learning to be able to be, not learning, someone creating the capacity to be with that thing in the first place. So that's what we're trying to aim for when we're creating transformation is, can we grow your capacity to be with something? The trouble is that our ego is a sneaky mofo. And the way that our ego works is it's going to get that, and then it's going to be like, okay, how do we kind of like, how can we do that but without having to really change? That's your ego's biggest game, is like, okay, that sounds good. How do I do that but without actually having to shift off of my position here in the middle of my comfort zone? That's why it's compelling to read books on leadership, because we read the books and we're like, oh, cool. Good, excellent. I should do more of that. I'll do that. I'll keep a lookout for that. But the book never pushes you fully out. And the ego works to like, okay, I'm going to take that and then we'll do it this way. So one of the biggest ways, the sneakiest ways that our ego does this work is by having us be with something. It's easier if I just tell you how it sounds. So here's how it sounds. I'm all right with this person's crying because I know that if I'm all right with it, eventually we'll be able to move on. Or put differently, I'm all right with me being kind of like frustrated with myself and I know I just need to be with this for a little bit longer and then it'll go away. So that sounds like, oh, I'm all right with. It sounds like, oh, I can be with this anger. But the sneakiness is that you are quote unquote willing to be with your anger, provided it then goes away. I'm willing to be frustrated. I'm willing to be with my partner's sadness because I know that if I do that, then eventually it'll leave. And that's a very sneaky, very subtle way of actually masking the truth, which is I'm not okay with this anger because it needs to fucking leave. I'll be with it. I'll tolerate it as long as eventually it goes away. No winning there. So this is like a really subtle, sneaky. I see a lot of coaches and leaders get caught by this one because they really believe, oh, I'm able. I've done a lot of work on my anger and I'm able to be okay with it. I know I just need to sit with it and eventually it'll leave. That sounds empowered. It sounds a lot like they probably have done a bunch of work on their anger or their sadness or their joy or ecstasy or whatever. They probably have done a lot of work, but that's now the gate that they have to walk through. They have to surrender the idea that this would ever leave at all. You on your way out, Grims? Oh, time to collapse. And here, I'll let you see it a little bit better. He's just, my dog's collapsed in front of my door. Ugh, I can't sit on my bed anymore. Collapse on the ground. And so the next stage, really the heart of like being able to be with something without any need for it to change is like, I'm okay if this is all that there is. I'm okay surrendering completely to all of the anger I have. And if this is just the way that my life is going to be, that I'm going to be this angry, I'm going to be this sad, I'm okay with that. I can be with that. I can be with here without it ever shifting. That that is really being with something. That is a breakthrough in our capacity to be with something. Is letting go of the idea that there's anywhere else to be other than here. Letting go of the idea that there's any other state that someone ought to or needs to be in. And that's a good way for you to like check your feet. If you're kind of like, I think I'm okay being here, but like, oh, I'd really like it to go. There's the holding out. And what's ultimately happening there is we have an unwillingness to surrender. I was sitting in ayahuasca ceremony, and the heart of that work is you drink the medicine and then we sit in resistance to what the medicine's trying to bring us. The medicine's like bringing us a vision of like our childhood, or it's bringing us a feeling, or it's bringing us nausea or whatever. And then we get into resistance with that. I don't want to feel this way. I don't want to feel nauseous. This sucks. Other people are laughing. I want to laugh. Or I don't want to think about my childhood that way. We have some closure. Not going to visit that. That's a bit too scary. I'm not going to go there. And that's what keeps us stuck. And we try to do this funny version of surrender, which is like filled with bargaining. I will surrender 95% to this. I will let myself feel halfway towards this. That's not surrender. You can only surrender entirely or not at all. Any degree of resistance is resistance. So that's what's up. That's what's up when we're practicing being with something is, can I fully surrender myself to feeling this way? And what's beautiful, I'm not saying that's easy, by the way. That is work. That is challenging. That's why transformation isn't just popping off all the time. Often it requires support to have someone point this out to us so that we can see like, oh crap, I am actually in resistance to this. But when we surrender in that way, it's amazing because, as Drew has just shared in the comments here, freedom is what becomes available. When you can release this idea, when you can be with people's sadness or whatever, the miracle of that is that you no longer need that aspect of life to look any different. You no longer need yourself to not be sad. when you become sad, you let yourself be sad. And then the paradox of that is because you no longer need it to look any different, it actually moves away much quicker because there's nothing for it to get caught by. There's no resistance any longer. So it just flows through you, just like everything else in life does. I think that's pretty fucking cool. I've been working with, this is a total aside, I've been working with a guy, he's like my physiotherapist slash chiropractor. Took me a long time to get on board with that methodology. And he does a lot of fascial release work. And he's like this mad genius, very brilliant. And he's really big in this, I think it was Buckminster Fuller idea called tensegrity, which is the idea of like something being having internal integrity through the tension of the varying parts. So it's sort of like those marionette little things that you push the bottom in and then they collapse and then you let it go and they kind of pop back up. That's a system in tensegrity. And so he, I'll come in and I'll be like, I injured my shoulder, playing pickleball. I was smashing too hard. I'm not sure what needs to happen. And he will like feel around in my body. And it's like, okay, I'm pretty sure. Do your abs hurt there? And I'm like, yeah. And he's like, what about the other side? Not so much, right? I'm like, yeah, not so much. And then he'll like poke my neck. He's like, how about there? I'm like, yeah, that sucks. Don't do that. And he's like, okay. So I'm pretty sure there's like this band of fascia that comes down from your head all the way down across, and then that levers into this. And so this crazy dude will like, yeah, the thing is the fascia up here is really tense on you, Adam, so we need to release that. And so he'll like put his elbow here and then whack it a bit. And what he's trying to do is shear the fascia off so that the layers of fascia can move more freely again. And the whole theory behind his work, which is fairly well borne out by science, is that what happens is your musculature, your fascia naturally tightens and gets what's called adhesed. Adhesed? Adhesion gets created. Adhered, that's the word. They get adhered together, stuck, dense. And then as a result, your system becomes dense and you're not able to move as freely. And then what happens there is you get inflammation. And the inflammation then has the rest of the muscles have to compensate for it. It's kind of like when you bite your cheek and your cheek swells and then you keep biting your cheek. So he's like, if we can move this up so we can get a bit more freeness and you don't go out and like create any more acute pain, don't do anything wild, don't do anything that seems to make it hurt more. But if we can do that, then it creates some space and then the stuff stops rubbing against itself and causing more inflammation. And then the system will return to a natural state. Your body will return to its more harmonious state. It'll heal itself. And what I love about this work is that he's doing at the level of fascia the same work I do with people at the level of their being. So as a coach, my belief is that human beings, we have a natural harmonic state internally. We have our way of being. There's a natural way that we can show up that's effortless. And if you can move the inflammation, the survival mechanism is an inflammation. It's an inflammatory response of your being. If we can address the things you're doing that are causing friction or hooks in the way you show up in your life, we move those out of the way, that stuff is naturally going to resolve itself. And suddenly you find life is way fucking easier and more simple and like fluid and there's more flow and I get to be happier. And it's not because we figured out like a bunch of exercises for you to take on to figure out how to be happy and then you did those every single day and now your spreadsheet shows I'm happy because of these 10 exercises. It's because all we did was resolve the stuff that was getting in the way of what was already innately available to you. That's pretty fucking cool. All that to say, the sides of my head up here are quite sore today because he was banging away at them with his elbow. He also, it was a funny story. I was like, my big toe, my big right toe has felt a little gouty. The joint, this knuckle on my big toe, the main knuckle that connects the toe to the foot, has been painful, which is usually a sign of gout coming on. But I've been like, can you just take a look? And he's like, yeah. He feels around and he's like, okay, so I'd like to do some work on your pelvis. Is that all right? I'm like, yeah. And he's like, basically, you're, as a man, your legs come up and then meet your hips, and then there's this scrotum. You come up, there's your taint, so he pokes right at that point where my leg connects with, my balls, the rest of my body. And he's like, okay, I got to do work here. That's where I'm going to be releasing. And I'm like, okay, not a pleasant feeling. But he's like, so just adjust if you need to. So I adjust over to one side, and he kind of does that. And he's like, okay, I'm going to do a bit of work on the other side. Or no, he didn't say he's going to do a bit of work on the other side. He was just like, okay, so how does that feel now? Does it feel as sore? I'm like, no, it actually feels a little bit freer there. And then he just, what about the other side? And he stabs a thumb right into the tip of my favorite part of my body. And I'm like, that actually hurts quite a bit. And he's like, yeah, yeah, okay, interesting. I thought that would free it up. I'm like, no, it's because you stabbed me with your thumb in my cock. Please don't do that anymore. So anyhow, it's a weird, wild west world that we're working in, both in terms of being, in terms of fascial release, all of this sort of stuff. Okay. Let me send that message, and here's something. We can talk about creating more powerful inquiries for ourselves. So we're all engaged in like kind of ongoing inquiries with ourselves, questions we ask ourselves most of the time unconsciously. Someone on LinkedIn wrote me, they connected with me, and they're like, what are the questions you're living into right now? And I was like, oh, that's cool. And I think mine were sort of like, am I ready to be a father? Maybe something along those lines. Have I missed the opportunity? That might have been there. And then there was something, oh, what do I need to move out of the way to allow spirit to continue to guide me along my path? And then I asked him, what about you? And he had one that was kind of cool, like, who do I want to be? And then the second one was, is all or nothing thinking really serving me as well as I think? So that second one is an example of the kind of inquiries we're often engaged with with ourselves. That inquiry is not actually an inquiry. It's an indictment. It's a stop doing this, stupid, is really what's at the heart of that question. So I assert. Because we already know the answer to that question. All or nothing thinking is probably not serving me. We already know that, right? So when we ask that question, really all we're doing is confirming a belief to ourselves and using it like a rolling pin to hit ourselves in the back of the head with. Stop doing that. Hey, dummy, do you really think this is serving you? It's not. So what we want to do is be like a coach for ourselves. By the way, caveat, this is not a substitute for having a coach. Don't fool yourself into believing it is. But you can still practice this way. You can practice by creating inquiries that deepen your curiosity about yourself, that take you further into learning about yourself, rather than inquiries that simply have you kind of try to convince or slap or willpower yourself to do something different. So an example, if we were to use that particular one, is all or nothing thinking really serving you well as you think? A more powerful inquiry might be, what has me jump to all or nothing thinking? What has that showing up here? That would be an interesting inquiry, because it would have you actually, rather than make yourself wrong for how you're showing up, it would have you get curious about what has you showing up that way in the first place. That's going to deepen your curiosity about yourself. It's going to also set aside some of the judgment that's there. And judgment is a lot like inflammation. Judgment has us closed, and it's hard to figure out what's going on when we're closed. So if we can bypass some of that judgment, if we can not make it wrong that we're showing up from all or nothing, then we can get curious about what's causing that in the first place. And that becomes a much more interesting inquiry to be in for ourselves. So we could ask something like that. We could ask ourselves an inquiry like, what's safe about going to all or nothing thinking here? And that would invite us to get curious, like, what does this allow me to stay safe from? What does this protect me from? So these are the kind of ways that we want to look at the questions we ask ourselves. We want to start to get curious, like, what are the questions, the inquiries that I'm engaged in with myself? And how could I shift those so that it become more generous and more curious about my life, how my life's going, what's happening, what I'm doing, why I'm doing it, et cetera, et cetera. That, if you start to practice with that, you'll start to broaden your understanding and appreciation for yourself. This is one of the things I do with clients is I listen to the questions that they're engaged with in themselves, and I support them to create questions that aren't necessarily more powerful, but that open them up to a broader level of inquiry and a deeper level of inquiry. One of my favorites that I hear a lot is like, who do I think I am to do X, Y, or Z? So the first thing we can do with that question is ask, yeah, who do you think you are? What's your answer to that question? Or if you're asking that question, kind of like ultimately to say like, fuck you, you're not you're not who you think you are, or like, here's who you actually are. This is why you can't do that. That's the thing underneath that question. Thanks, Drew. If you're peacing out, peace, love you, brother. Then we can ask ourselves, well, who do I think I am that tells me I'm not able to do this thing? What's my story about myself that says I can't do this? And then we can start to get curious about that story. Where, what is like, how does that story serve me? How does that story protect me? And the thing I love about a question like, how does this serve me? Is that most of the time our response is, it doesn't. That's not an answer to the question I just asked. How does this serve you? The answer must, like, to actually answer that question, you actually have to figure out how it serves you. The question isn't, does this serve you? Yes or no. It doesn't would be an answer to that question. Does this serve you doing this? No. Okay, great. Inquiry over. I'm going to go back to drinking and playing video games. I would love doing both of those things. The question is, how does this serve you? So implied in that question is, this serves me. This is here for a reason. I created this way of thinking for some particular reason. What are all of the reasons that this might be there? And what we're doing when we're asking a question like that, when we're engaging at an inquiry like that, is that we're holding that everything that we do and bring is here for a reason, and that that reason is valid. We're taking away the idea that the story about ourselves that, oh, I just do dumb things. I'm just lazy. This is just here because I don't give a fuck about other people. We're taking all that off the table, and we're actually holding ourselves far more sacred than we do most of the time. So by upgrading our inquiries this way, we can really give ourselves access to a great deal more of our depth. We actually start to relate to ourselves from a far more sacred place simply by virtue of being willing to deepen the level of inquiry that we go with ourselves. So what you're actually doing is you're starting to relate to yourself a little bit more the same way a potent coach would relate to their clients, which is to say, to relate to that person is, this person is incredible. This person has all the capacity in the world. They just don't believe that about themselves. They've trained themselves out of that story. I am going to stand outside of their training, outside of the story they've learned to buy into about themselves. And I'm going to get really curious about why that story's there, what that story does that has it so persistent. Do that and you'll start to develop a much deeper appreciation for yourself. And I got to tell you, appreciating yourself is awesome. I love the crap out of this dude right here. I think he's really cool and funny and brilliant. And I also think he's hilarious because he does stupid stuff. And I find it funny when my wife sometimes says, you know, Adam, sometimes I ask myself, how can someone so smart do such stupid things? And I find that hilarious because I can do stupid things. And the reason I can find that hilarious is not like hilarious, haha, now let's all stop laughing because I laughed at it, but hilarious like it's genuinely hilarious is because I've learned to be able to be with the stupidity that is inherent in human beings. We are brilliant by our very nature, and we are stupid by our very nature. And these days, I no longer have significance. I used to have a ton of significance around stupidity, which is why I was actively judging people for being stupid and then filtering them out and, shunting them away into their stupid section. And I was doing the same thing for me and parts of myself. I had like this version of Adam's cool because he's smart, but this version over here sucks. By being able to be with all of that stuff, I have way more capacity for myself. So please take that on. Give yourself the gift of really finding delight in all of who you be. Okay, 10:55. We're going to go a little longer. I've got a few more things I want to talk about. EQ. Let's talk about emotional quotient because that's a popular little ditty. Always. I think it was Marshall Goldsmith. I was cruising LinkedIn looking for like, what are some things that I could talk about today? And excuse me, I was cruising LinkedIn and I saw a post about IQ versus EQ. And um, I thought that would be a great thing to talk about because EQ and IQ are both so tightly wound up in our identity. IQ is especially pernicious because we have this idea that someone's IQ score is like a fixed measure and that it tells us whether they're smart or not. IQ is a particular lens through which to measure what I would call someone's capacity of brilliance. So people that have a lot of brilliance will tend to score high on the IQ. I have a high IQ. I'm pretty sure I qualify as the Sigma Society. That's like very high IQ people. But that is kind of irrelevant. I got a little embarrassed as I shared that. Interesting. The thing about IQ is that it's a very poor measure of any kind of brilliance that exists outside of the box in which IQ measures. And so these are the trouble with this sort of stuff is we get into this belief like the box becomes the world. So we're like, oh yeah, if you have an IQ, if you have a high IQ, you're smart, and if you have a low IQ, you're dumb. And then that's just the way you are. Not very powerful. IQ doesn't do things like measure wisdom or someone's capacity to appreciate spirit or divinity. Are these measures of intellect? Do these represent someone's brilliance? Possibly, but they're not captured by IQ. So they fall out. And then again, the box becomes the entire frame for how we view the world. We end up starting here. Here's how we'll measure it. And then slowly over time, that becomes this entire frame and we can't see anything but. So IQ is not a good measure of your brilliance, of the potency, the gifts, the possibility, all of what you have to bring into the world. But we relate to it like it is, and we relate to it like it's a fixed thing. And what's happened in response to that is people are like, but there's also soft skills. There's stuff like connection. I'm going to list some qualities of being here. Connection, compassion, love, divinity, generosity. These are all things that might fall into the category of EQ. And now we are using this notion of EQ as an attempt to kind of measure a soft set of skills that someone has, and we are attaching the same like fixed nature to it that we are with IQ. If you have a lot of EQ, great. If you don't, bad. Some people just have soft skills, and that's that. Bay and I used to lecture at our alma mater, university. We'd come in, one of Bay's MBA profs would bring us in, and we'd talk briefly about leadership as it pertained to coaching, the work that we did. And we were describing what is called for from a leader. We were sort of talking about like your capacity to create the impact you want to create in the world, and your ability to generate more leaders. And someone put their hand up and they're like, yeah, but this doesn't really cover EQ. And some people have that and some people don't. Like if you just don't have that, you don't have it and you're just not a good candidate for leadership. So notice, right? Again, we've got this dividing, whereas before it was like smart people versus dumb people. Now we've got soft skills people versus not soft skills people. And the thing about EQ is because it's newer, it's ironic, right? This idea has been created in response to IQ, sort of like, yeah, but, and yet it's being now used inside the same kind of diminishing box, arbitrary kind of fixed entity box that IQ is being used. The trouble with these ideas is that it then has us look at our staff or our people and conclude this person just doesn't have EQ and that person does. That's a crappy way to look at the world, because it immediately puts the world into two boxes: available to develop leadership, not available. So I've got assertions about this. Are you surprised to hear that? Is it astounding for you to believe that I have some counter beliefs to that? Probably not. Hello, Rocky. My dog over here, cutting some serious logs. I'm going to just show you. He is sitting very comfortable on this bed, and it's just a continual yeah, making fun of you live on air. He's like, I don't care. Maybe I'll fart then. How about I fart in your stupid face, Adam? And he might well do that. That is his prerogative as a dog that I love more than anything else, other than my wife. Okay, so got some opinions about EQ. The first is this idea that people either have soft skills or don't is a terrible blight on leadership because it immediately lets you let yourself off the hook in developing people that you've decided don't have soft skills, don't have EQ. It also immediately eliminates them from the running as a potential leader, and it puts you in a shitty position. The shitty position is, fuck, I got to figure out how to hire the people that do have soft skills. And because soft skills are not fixed the way you think they are, you're going to end up creating a whole bunch of awkward, contrived systems to try to figure this stuff out. And all you're going to do is end up seeing through a little box. And again, just like IQ, that box will become your world, your limited world. A much more powerful lens from which to operate is that everyone has the capacity for soft skills. Every human being has the capacity for connection and love and heart and these sort of qualities, but they may have learned to stifle that. They may have learned that it's unsafe to let that out into the world. And the great irony I see is that time and time again, the people that get dismissed, the people that people conclude they just don't have soft skills, those people, their very essence is often something like love, something like connection, something along those lines. But they've learned to turn that off because they learned that that part of themselves was unsafe. So they created a survival mechanism. The survival mechanism shut down the connection, the love that they are. It focused more on like being brilliant or smart or whatever. That allowed them to not have to feel disappointment or heartbreak or whatever. And then over time, they got better and better and better and better at playing that game and weaker and weaker and weaker and weaker at being with things like disappointment and heartbreak, which then kind of polarizes them. When they do have to be with those things, their reaction's even stronger. They push even further into like a lack of connection, a lack of all that. So the great irony of labels like EQ, IQ, this sort of stuff, is it actually pushes away the very people that we claim we're looking for. Ironically, we end up saying, not them, they don't have soft skills, when actually those are the people with the most capacity for soft skills. They're just beyond your capacity as a leader to develop them and to see them. One of the things about leadership when we're developing transformational leadership is the first step is to one, break apart this lens people have that people are fixed, that there's a way people are and a way people aren't. That's the first thing we got to get rid of. The next thing is we got to work on, once we've created a bit of space between that way the world is and the person can see like maybe that's a bit of a belief that I have, a lens, then we have to support them to start to create a new, more empowered lens, one that would allow more possibility available in their leadership. A lens like everyone has the capacity for soft skills, but they might need some support to develop them. Maybe they just haven't developed that yet. And it's really common for people to be frustrated because they feel like that's going to take too long, or why don't I just hire the people that have the blah, 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 blah. And we can attempt to do that. But the trouble is that sooner or later, you're going to run into this. And if you do your very best to like just hire people that are already evolved and developed that way, that's great. But eventually you're going to reach the limits of that. And because you have chosen to like just try to find the right people rather than developing the ability to develop people so that they can grow with you, you will eventually outgrow your people, and then you will have to get better and better and tighter at hiring until you'll find and discover in frustration, fuck, hiring's hard. It doesn't have to be. In order for hiring to be easier, though, you have to be open as a leader to developing your people, and that requires developing yourself. So EQ is a little bit like, again, I like that word too, Rocky. Rocky's saying pernicious. I love that word. Me too. Pernicious meaning it's sneaky. It's a bit troubling because it can get in underneath. It flies low into the radar and causes problems. Cancer is pernicious. You know, it starts to metastasize and cause problems before we can really see it. So EQ as a concept can be very pernicious because it suggests you have some fixed capacity to be a certain way. And anytime we're holding people as having a fixed capacity to be a certain way, that's problematic as a leader. It diminishes our ability to evolve, to evoke, to create, to develop a particular flavor of leadership. Okay, we're down to one viewer. That's always a good indication that it might be time to move on, to close down. I'm going to speak to one last thing before we finish up. I've seen a number of these posts on LinkedIn. Facebook a little bit more, they're more popular on LinkedIn. They are, I don't care who's doing better than me. Usually it's attached with a photo of the person looking fabulous. It's either a dude in a suit, like crushing it at life, or a woman looking beautiful, crushing it at life. But the statement is like, I don't care who's doing better than me at the start. Empowerment. Fuck you, the rest of you. It's not really what they're saying. I don't care who's doing better than me. I only care about doing better than I was last year. So there's this sort of like flip the script on the comparison. I don't I don't compare myself to other people. I only compare myself to myself a year ago, to my growth. So on the one hand, that's some growth for these people, I would assert, right? They've moved from comparing themselves to other people to comparing themselves to other selves, to themselves. But the thing that I really want to showcase here is the way of being underneath this. This is where ontology is so powerful, is because we can look below the level. So in terms of the doing, what we can see here is what they used to be doing was comparing themselves to other people. Now what they are doing is comparing themselves to themselves a year ago. That's far more healthy, right? What a change, transformation. As always, we look at the being to determine the real transformation. And the being here is actually the same. The being is still one of comparison. It's now no longer me versus you. It's me versus me a year ago. And guess what? That's still a you. That's still a comparison. It's still a me versus. And so what's so neat about this is like how effective our system is at maintaining homeostasis. If your homeostasis is one of comparison, and then you conclude that sucks, I'm not happy with what's going on there, your system will find a way to like rearrange that and change it so that it occurs different and might even be a little bit different, but allows you to continue playing the same game that you were playing prior to mixing things up. It's the same game. You're just now comparing yourself to you a year ago. And that's better, right? That would almost be like if someone said, how could we word this? I no longer compare myself to people that are further along in life than me. I only compare myself to people that are not as far along as me. And if we saw someone saying that, we'd be like, that's kind of why are you doing that? And is that really the game you want to be playing? But that's actually the game they're playing. So imagine if we were able, hey, Michelle, I'll come to your question in a sec. Imagine if we were able to drop comparison entirely from the picture. Imagine if we could leave that entirely out of the game and we didn't have to compare ourselves at all. That would be a breakthrough. That would be tremendous. That would be a seismic shift because there would no longer be any requirement to be further along than anyone or anything or any time else. And imagine some of the possibility that would open up for this person, right? That would allow this person to actually have their life go like their progress go forward and then back for a year and then forward. Whereas currently that time going back is going to be problematic inside of this comparative measure that's been drawn. So I want to be clear. This does not mean the person is wrong or that it's bad or that it wasn't even a breakthrough at first when they created this system. I'm not going to compare myself to other people, compare myself to a year ago, but that a real like seismic shift breakthrough is one where the whole strategy comparing yourself falls away entirely. And if we were working with this person, the first conversation I would be bringing is, what do you think it is that has comparison be so important for you in general? What is comparing yourself to other people or to yourself a year ago or to yourself in a year from now? Or like, what do you think all of that is designed to do? Because I'd be willing to bet that underneath there's some story about like not being good enough or needing to prove to themselves that they're good enough or something. And if we broke that story up, if that could be dissolved, all of the comparison would just be like, they could still do it. It would be available to them if they needed to, because sometimes we do need to compare, but there would be no necessity for it. And so that's an example where if you can break that thing up underneath, then this whole strategy designed to address that, it dissolves. It just falls away because we're like, oh, there's absolutely no need for me to do that. I could revisit it. It's available, but why bother? So that is a good example, I think, for like the power of ontological work when we're looking at the being underneath, because it helps us see first through that like kind of slickness that our ego works with, where it's like, yo, check this out. You've moved past that. You're no longer comparing to like, oh crap, the way of being is the same. And then to get below that, to not even really worry about the comparison, like, oh, what is this kind of designed to create? Okay. Vishal, send me a message or an email. You can email me, adam@adamquiney.com, or you can just send me a Facebook message. Send me a private message and we'll talk about that. And nice to see you. I think this is the first time I've seen your name show up on my lives. That's going to be everything we talk about today. Thank you, Raf and David, for your topic suggestions. And anyone else that has any, it's always a huge support. It's way more fun to talk about stuff that people are bringing or that they're like noticing showing up in their own lives. If there's stuff that's frustrating you on LinkedIn, if there's stuff that's frustrating you on Facebook, share that with me too, because that's always, I find a lot of my inspiration is hidden underneath my frustration and my intimidation. And so I often, when I'm trying to come up with topics for these shows, I go on LinkedIn, I'm like, what's pissing me off? Because there's energy there for me. And if I can sit with that and then open my heart to it, then I kind of see like, oh, there's something deeper available, and I'm mad at this person for not getting it, the same way I get mad at me for not getting stuff I feel I should. Okay, cool. So there's some work I can do there, and then there's also a beautiful topic we can explore together. So please share that sort of stuff. Super valuable. Really appreciate it. I'm going to do a live, I think, this coming week in the evening. It'll be our cocktail lounge night in the pub. So I'll let you know when that's coming up. And until next time, thanks for tuning in, guys. Peace.